But you know, there is an answer to atheism. We don't have anything to run from or be ashamed of. I'll never forget, as a young country boy, I was converted at 20 years of age, and a short time after, God called me to preach. So I went down to LSU, Louisiana State University, and enrolled in speech. And I sat down with these fellows. What do you call these fellows that help you decide what you ought to take? Counselors. I sat down with one of these counselors, and he said, well, let's see, you're going to be a minister. I said, yes, sir, I want to preach about Jesus. He said, well, you need to study philosophy. I said, what? He said, philosophy. I said, sir, what's that? He said, well, if you don't know what it is, I better put you down for 2 courses in it. And he put me down for 2 courses. I'll never forget going in that philosophy class, and the fellow I drew as a teacher was Dr. Carmichael. He was the head of the philosophy department at Louisiana State University. And Dr. Carmichael looked the part. He had a long, flowing white beard and mustache hanging down on his chest. And I'll never forget that first day in class. Man, I was scared to death sitting out there, you know, and he got up and got the cards on all the members of the class, and he got to flipping through. When he got to mine, he stopped. He said, Mr. Adams, do we have a Mr. Adams with us? I held that head up, you know. He always said, Mr. Adams, glad to meet you. Would you please stand up, Mr. Adams? So I stood up. That big college class of a couple of hundred all stared at me. And he said, I see here on your card, Mr. Adams, that you're studying for the ministry. I said, yes, sir. He said, class, would you pay attention? Now, Mr. Adams evidently has the benefit of some knowledge that the rest of us do not have. Said he's evidently seen God or touched him or met him somewhere. Mr. Adams, if you don't mind, why don't you just take a few minutes and tell the class how you know there's a God? Well, I started telling him about how Jesus saved me, and he'd stop me every time I'd get started and say, Mr. Adams, we don't want a sermon. We just want you to give us the evidence. Have you ever touched God? Have you ever smelled God? Have you ever seen God? And man, that man cut me down every time I turned around and scared me to death. While I sat out there, I didn't open my mouth unless he'd make me. And he kept calling on me, loved to embarrass me, get me up in front of the class, make fun of me, make fun of God. And everybody else that believed like he did, they'd giggle. And I was just sitting out there saying, Lord, by your grace, I'm going to get this fellow before I leave this school. Now, let me tell you the number one lesson I learned in philosophy. In fact, this is the only thing I believe I ever really learned in philosophy for certainty, and that is that you can't be sure about anything. I mean, you can't be sure about anything. His favorite lesson, Dr. Carmichael's favorite lesson was this. He'd ask somebody, what color are crows? And naturally they'd say, black. Oh, no, Dr. Carmichael would say, no, you can't say crows are black. You can't be sure of that. Because to be able to say crows are black, you'd have to have all the crows that ever have been, all the crows that are, and all the crows that ever will be. So you can't be sure crows are black. I must have listened to that 100 times. Every time somebody'd say something, he'd say, wait, that's just like the crows. Now, you can't say that for certainty because you don't have all the crows that ever have been, all that are, and all that ever will be. For 2 years, I sat through 2 classes in philosophy, listening to him tell me I wasn't sure what color crows were. Well, my day finally came. One day after listening to him a little, I learned how to talk to an atheist, how to witness to one. I caught him up in his office one day with a lot of students in there, and I walked in with my Bible. I said, Dr. Carmichael, I want to talk to you a minute. Yes, Mr. Adams. He said, what is it, Mr. Adams? I said, Dr. Carmichael, if. You know, that's one thing I learned in philosophy. You're all right as long as you put that word in front of everything. You always say if. I said, Dr. Carmichael, if there is a God, and if this God made the universe, and if God put us in it, and if we rebelled against God and sinned, and if God sent His Son down to die on a cross in our place because He loved us, and if He knocks on the door of our heart and wants to come in and save us, and if we reject Him and refuse to let Him come in and save us, isn't it logical that we ought to go to hell and burn forever and ever and ever? Mr. Adams, he said, Mr. Adams, we have no evidence of any kind of fire that will burn but not consume. Yes, I said, that's right, Dr. Carmichael, but I said, you know, that fire is just like those crows. I said, we don't have all the fires that ever have been, all that are, and all that ever will be. Dr. Carmichael turned red in the face and wheeled around and walked out of the office. The Bible said a man that says there's no God, he's a fool. He's got an intellectual problem. You see, all intelligent people, people of normal intelligence, when they go to decide something, they weigh the evidence on both sides. Now, how much evidence does an atheist have that there is no God? Young men and women, listen, when some professor tries to cram you in a corner and ridicule your faith, he says, prove there's a God. Why, the best thing to say to him is prove there isn't a God. Amen? He's going to live by the atheist's faith. He ought to have some evidence for it. And in all my years of studying and reading and listening and debating with atheists, I've never found but one bit of evidence that the atheist has on his side. One bit of evidence that there is no God.